So like Chino said, my name is Jobob, and I'm super excited to be talking about the college battleground on our colleges and universities right now. The first thing that I want to answer is the question you probably all have of Jobob. Is that his real name? Yes, it is. My parents, who are here, one grandparent was Joe, the other one was Bob. So my parents decided to compromise and name me Jobob and made high school really difficult for this guy. That's how you have a brown guy with a hillbilly Alabama backwoods name. I do probably have the most teeth of any Jobob you'll ever meet, so I'll keep that there. A little bit about myself and why I'm here and how I ended up here. Actually, before that, I grew up in this church, actually. Interestingly enough, small world, grew up right in these buildings over here, going to a high school ministry with Shadrach. My parents still go to this church, so close to home. This is great. I don't usually get to come back home places. A little bit about myself. Gina kind of explained it a little bit. I've been working in California politics for a long time. In 2018 is probably the most notable. I ran a guy named Travis Allen for governor of California. Some Travis fans. Love the guy. Really great dude. Unfortunately, didn't come out the way we wanted it to, and Governor King Dictator Gavin Newsom ended up winning that race. But about a year ago, I decided to step back from the political world and kind of into the limelight, which I'm still getting used to, of talking about politics. And I landed a job at the Daily Caller. And if you're not familiar with the Daily Caller, there you go, Daily Caller. The Daily Caller was founded by a little-known talk show host by the name of Tucker Carlson, with the idea in mind of creating a platform for journalists who love America. And that's what the Daily Caller is still today. I have the opportunity to host Daily Caller Live each and every morning across all your Daily Caller platforms. And in doing that, I met a guy by the name of Charlie Kirk. Any Charlie fans here? Yeah, great dude. I met Charlie a couple months ago, and then this year I became a Turning Point USA contributor. If you're not familiar with Turning Point, which it sounds like a lot of you are, if you're not familiar with Turning Point USA is the best grassroots college campus attempt to de-wokeify our schools and universities. And that is why I ended up here talking about colleges and universities and the wokeness that has infected almost every school you can think of. A couple weeks ago, I was doing an event with Charlie up in Berkeley, of all places. They were not huge fans of us. Charlie was doing his table talks and talking to students, and I was undercover, incognito, talking to people around the campus. And I feel like a conversation I had with a young woman on the Berkeley campus kind of summed up the idea or the problem with college campuses. One interaction summed it up best. It was when I talked to this girl who was very not excited that Charlie was at their campus. She was saying, "Charlie Kirk is evil." And I said, "Okay, why do you think that?" "Because he endorses evil policies." Like what? I'm sure a lot of you have had these cyclical conversations with people where you ask questions and they resort to, "Well, because he likes Donald Trump." And the conversation pretty much ended with what I think is indicative of our college campuses now. It ended with her telling me, "It is not my job to educate you. You need to go do the work yourself." So I said, "Okay, if that's how you feel." But that, I think, is indicative of where our colleges and universities are now. And that's why I think the battleground on college campuses is among the most important that we have today. And the battle against wokeness is something that we need to crush. Now, the crisis on college campuses is not new by any stretch of the imagination. But I do want to provide some context into what I think wokeness and college campuses actually are. I want to help reframe, if I can, our thinking about how we look at wokeness and the college battlegrounds. The battlegrounds on college campus is not just about bad ideas. It's not just about woke ideology. There is a deeper game being played. To help understand this a little bit, I want to give some historical context and briefly walk through the reign of Mao Zedong, the chairman of Communist China. In the 50s, China was unified under the Chinese Communist Party, specifically under Chairman Mao. When he was first taking office, dictatorness, whatever that term that he is, when Mao first started, he was set on a 5-year plan, and his goal was to create a communist society where everybody works for the state. Now, I don't want to get mired down in the reasons why that didn't work, but guess what? That didn't work. He faced the same failures that every single communist dictator faced throughout the dawn of time. Centrally planned societies don't work. But here's the thing with dictators. They generally don't reevaluate and make changes. No, they usually double down, and that's exactly what Mao did himself. Mao's second 5-year plan was called the Great Leap Forward. And if you know anything about the Great Leap Forward in communist China, it could also be described as the giant steps backwards, because he doubled down on his communist ideas. Millions of peasants were forced into a singular cause. They worked for the government for a government paycheck. It was the end of individually owned land. Millions of people supported the Great Leap Forward because socialist ideas sound good on their face. But lo and behold, the Great Leap Forward didn't work either. Humanity doesn't change. Humans are driven by incentive or fear. And the officials in the Communist Party were worried that many laborers lacked incentive to work, which was exactly the case. The policies were failing, and everybody, including Chinese Communist Party, started to realize it. Mao himself considered scaling back the Great Leap Forward, but because of political pressure from the outside, he instead did what all dictators do and went tyrannical, and held on and continued to double down. Laborers who didn't meet their food production quota starved, which led to millions dead. The lowest estimate of the death toll caused by the Great Leap Forward policies was 18 million. The higher estimate, which is probably more likely, was 45 million people dead in communist China's Great Leap Forward. Mao was blamed for the death of millions by his own government. So, here's what you have. China has bad policy that isn't working. CCP leaders and the Chinese people themselves are losing faith in Mao. So what does every dictator do to try and stay in power? They come up with a last-ditch effort to maintain control. Mao was in search of an idea. He needed a system to promote his political beliefs. So he turned to what every dictator does: indoctrination. Mao started to put a plan together to indoctrinate those who he believed could be fighters. There was a mass media propagandist to get people on his side. They gaslit dissidents to retain fear in terms of being in favor of Mao's policy. Does any of this sound familiar at this point? Police officers for Mao's system were punishing those who disagreed with anything. Insert China's Cultural Revolution. Mao sought to force customs, cultures, and habits on the people of China. At the onset of the Cultural Revolution, a university president was accused of being a capitalist. Oh, a dirty, dirty capitalist, which is like the worst thing that you can be accused of in communist China. Mao then used that to get students across China to rally against capitalism and pro-communism. At this point, the CCP had been in power and indoctrinating students for their entire schooling history. And so they were easy for Mao to reach. The students also believed in communism because they're young and idealistic, and they believed in Mao despite the failures of the Great Leap Forward. Mao would use the student energy to mobilize an unofficial army of sorts to promote what he wanted. Students were called the Red Guards, and they were unhinged and would physically beat people and sometimes even kill people that they disagreed with. Political disagreements to them were justifications to commit violence. I hope you're starting to see the parallels here. The CCP also didn't do much to stop them because Mao thought it was a way to solidify his power. Violence was not seen as a negative word if you used it against your class enemies. A red book of Mao's sayings functioned as the guide for the Red Guards. They believed every word and used every single phrase to inflict chaos. Mao used the Red Guard to take out key class enemies and take over cities. Only pro-revolutionary media was allowed. In the 10 years of the Chinese Cultural Revolution, the Red Guards ransacked the country, and eventually, Mao lost control of them, and China devolved into chaos, in need of massive reform to get back on track. What I want to get across with this historical context is the usefulness of indoctrinated students. The idealistic youth is nothing new. This has been a time-honored tradition from communists and, in our terms now, the far left, over and over again. There's a legal saying that my friends in law use. It says, if the law is on your side, pound the law. If the facts are on your side, pound the facts. If neither are on your side, pound the table. And it seems that that's exactly where we are now. In order to parallel what happened in China 50 years ago to what's happening today, we need to look no further than the failed policies. Our trajectory is the same as China was in the Great Leap Forward to the Chinese Cultural Revolution. Just like the Great Leap Forward, policies aren't working. This shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. I don't want to sound like I'm beating a dead horse, but AB 109, Prop 47, Prop 57, ever heard of them? Yeah. Crime has gone crazy in the state of California. Open border policy from the federal government to California's sanctuary state policy has allowed massive illegal immigration. Specifically in California, it also has led to the rise of crime. Education standards have fallen so low in California that we're now towards the bottom of the entire country. And it's led to mass losses of education. Ballot harvesting voter laws has led to a question of legitimacy of California's entire elections process. Just like the Great Leap Forward, the hyper-progressive policies of the left failed as they do time and time again. And just like China, policies have gotten so bad that people are starting to wake up. Look, what are people like in this room? People are starting to wake up. I don't know. Do you know anybody, or are you a person that would have never 10 years ago, 5 years ago, gone to a political conference? Who does that with their Saturday? But people are starting to wake up just like they did in China. The left themselves have failed and put themselves in the same position as Chairman Mao. And just as Chairman Mao did, failing in the Great Leap Forward, the left is doing for their failed policies of hope and change. Just like Mao attempted to mobilize and radicalize Chinese youth in the 60s and 70s as a desperate attempt to hold on to power, the left is trying to radicalize students by indoctrination on our college campuses and universities. That is the context that I want to provide. I want us to look at wokeism not as a list of bad ideas. It's an indoctrination strategy used by forces trying to maintain power. Wokeism is not the fight for inclusion. It is not simply ideology run amok. Wokeness is a deeper strategy behind the left's fight for control. And that is why our colleges and universities are one of the most important battlegrounds that we have. As what happened under Chairman Mao, the powers that be need to find a way to maintain power. And just like the strategy of the Red Guard, the left in California and around the country are turning to idealistic students who don't know any better. So with that reframe in mind, I want to go through some of the things that we're seeing on college campuses. Remember, wokeism is a strategy, not just bad ideas. I thought this article explained things well. This is a Newsweek article by Samuel J. Abrams, professor of politics at Sarah Lawrence College. He wrote this entire article about the discrepancies between ideologies of professors and administration. As you can probably guess, there were a lot of lefty professors and administrators and a tiny bit of conservative administrators. But this quote from this article, I think, helped sum it up pretty well. Americans' education program are dangerous for higher education because they adhere to a pedagogy that transforms their graduates into activists. Their training teaches future administrators to deconstruct the society in which they live and promote their views at work, in dining halls, dormitories, and throughout campus. It should come to no surprise that today's college administrators try to dictate the very language their students are allowed to use, which they see as a powerful tool, keyword tool, that can be used to perpetuate oppression. I want to reiterate this. Wokeness is a tool. If you only leave with one thing today, know that wokeness is not just fighting bad ideas. It is a tool the left is using to try and indoctrinate our students. One of the most ubiquitous woke ideologies is this idea of anti-racism, which is just racism, by the way. In today's college lecture halls, anti-racism has taken a prominent position in student curriculum. Palomar Community College in California has declared its goal to become an anti-racist institution, officially announcing a plan to pre-screen all job applicants to ensure that they are dedicated to anti-racism. This is happening, California colleges. A list of anti-racist resources appears on the California School System website, the UC School System's website. Anti-racist education, I'm sure you've all heard this, is set to become a prerequisite for admission to California colleges. High schoolers are going to be required to learn about white supremacy, anti-blackness, and the patriarchy. How to Be an Anti-Racist, the terribly racist book written by one Ibram X. Kendi, was University of California, Davis's campus community book project of 2021 and 2022. Now, we talked about Mao's Little Red Book. It was used by the Red Guard to justify physical violence against those they disagreed with. One of the many quotes out of the Red Book was, "A revolution is an insurrection, an act of violence by which one class overthrows another." So I'm curious, how are books like How to Be an Anti-Racist, White Fragility, So You Want to Talk About Race, any different, especially when Antifa and BLM are using them in the same way to justify criminal violence? Authors like Ibram X. Kendi, do you guys know that his real name is Henry Rogers? It is, look it up. Ibram X. Henry Rogers, Kendi, Robin DiAngelo, Patrisse Cullors, co-founder of Black Lives Matter, have all spoken about critical theory. Now, we won't dive into that right now, but critical theory being the basis of a cause for a need for revolution. James Lindsay, if you guys don't know who James Lindsay is, he is hilarious. You need to go take out your phones and type in James Lindsay. He's on the front lines of fighting wokeism, especially on Twitter. The guy's unbelievable, and I don't think he sleeps. We had a conversation a couple weeks ago, and James told me something that should have been pretty self-evident, but hadn't thought about it up until this point. He told me in a conversation that he does the craziest thing when he reads these woke ideologues. He says he reads what they say, and then he believes them. He says when they say things like, "We need a revolution," he thinks, "Oh my goodness, these people think they need a revolution." And that's exactly what we need to do in the fight on our college campuses. We need to believe people about their plans to cause a revolution by indoctrinating our college students. Now, one of the best ways to find what's happening is Turning Point USA has a fantastic website called Professor Watchlist. So that same rally that I was at in UC Berkeley, a guy explained it better than I'm gonna explain it. He had a megaphone and honestly was yelling for an impressive amount of time about how much he hated Turning Point and Charlie and everybody associated. But at one point, he took his megaphone and said, Turning Point USA and Charlie Kirk has a website called Professor Watchlist, and their goal is to expose what the professors are teaching in their classroom. To which I said, correct. No arguments there. You got it. But Professor Watchlist is the best place that you can find what's happening going on our college campuses. Couple examples. Dr. Blair Peters is an assistant professor of surgery in the Division of Plastic and Reconstructive Surgery at the Oregon Health and Sciences University of Medicine. In April 2022, Dr. Peters announced that he had performed gender-affirming mastectomies on 3 young adults and adolescents. Now, hold on with me. We're gonna hit on a reoccurring theme. In an op-ed for MedPages, Dr. Peters says he believes in the medical community has historically oppressed queer people, and being queer in medicine and surgery is an act of resistance. This is a common theme. Wokeism is a strategy, not just bad ideas. Dr. Candace Bond is an assistant professor at Augusta University, while at St. Louis University, Bond taught a course titled Politics of the Streets, where students were able to receive credit for volunteering at local abortion clinics to satisfy the course's mandated volunteer service. Dr. Carol Anderson is a professor at Emory in Atlanta, Georgia. Dr. Anderson insinuated that riots are the only effective means that residents of Ferguson, remember the Michael Brown, can utilize to make their voices heard, advocating for riots and violence. Dr. Carol Lasser is a professor of history at Oberlin College in Ohio. Lasser shredded a copy of the US Constitution because it was an oppressive document, and students felt pain. Indoctrinating students to think words are violence. To go on a quick tangent here, I would love to open Jobob's camp for words of violence. When you come to my camp, there'll be 2 sessions. The first session is I'm gonna say really, really mean things to you. The second session, I'm gonna punch you as hard as I can in the stomach, and then you can tell me which one is more violent. Dr. Bruce Munger is a director of undergraduate studies of earth and science at Cornell University. In an interview, Dr. Munger described himself as a socialist and admits his classes are taught for the purpose of creating revolutionaries. The common theme is this: indoctrinating our college students is a strategy. I've said it before, if you leave with one thing, that's what I hope you leave with. The list of professors goes on and on and on. And make no mistake, they are all aware of the theory behind it. Getting rid of the 4 olds. I've skipped this part with the mouse, sorry about that. Mao Zedong had the 4 olds. Getting rid of the 4 olds were culture, customs, habits, and ideas. That's exactly what the left is trying to do now with indoctrinating our students. For the sake of time, I'm gonna skip down to queer theory. Queer theory is pushing its way into university systems as well. If you're not familiar with queer theory, it is, take 2. It is a subset of critical theory, and it mimics a lot of the boundaries that critical theory expects, except for its main purpose and its main principle is it focuses on the meaninglessness of everything. And I don't mean meaninglessness in the sense of a lack of meaning or purpose. I mean literally definitionless. Queer theory essentially speaks to prove that truth and societal norms are entirely relative. It's where this newfound conundrum of what is a woman comes from. A queer theorist would say, I don't know. Do you know? We don't know. They believe that morality is relative, and it's a pervasive belief that is continuing to grow rapidly. Queer theory also seeks to remove definitions so that nothing is anything and everything can be whatever it wants to be. Now, I would imagine the question that you probably have after hearing about queer theory is, what is the point? And I would say, exactly. That is exactly the point when it comes to the battlegrounds on our college campuses. Wokeness is not a standard that's intended to be met. Wokeness on our colleges and universities is not meant to teach students anything meaningful. It's meant to indoctrinate young adults to hate a system that provided them with the very opportunity to attend the college in the first place. Wokeness isn't about bad ideas, it is a strategy. I feel like the next note I have is remind them again that wokeness is a strategy. I feel like I've beat that pretty good into you by now at this point. Okay, great. How do we fight it? Well, there's one thing that we can't do, and I've seen this too many times, is shy away from conversations. I know every single person in this room either has a kid in college or knows a kid in college. We can't shy away from the difficult conversations in our family and in our community. And when we don't shy away from those conversations, I want to keep in mind 3 objectives. 1, awareness. This is not necessarily arguing the ideas that they hold. This is making them aware of what's happening to them and how they're being played. If you can make them aware of what's happening to them situationally, I don't know if you've talked to a college student recently, but they're pretty hard-headed. They don't like taking a lot of criticism, but they also don't like being played. And so if instead of arguing their ideas are bad because their ideas aren't meant to be argued, let them know that, hey, respectfully, here's what's happening to you. I would guarantee you watch them develop some sort of resistance to the ideas that they're being taught on their college campus. The second one is finding common ground. And this is ubiquitous across really every conversation, but college students specifically. The wokest of the woke have common ground between us and them, believe it or not. One of my favorite examples, remember when the Chinese bat fever was called the Chinese bat fever because it was a Chinese bat fever? Remember how that was racist for a long time? Then we figured out, oh wait, it was the Chinese communist bat fever. A lot of college students bought into that. And they said, well, no, it's racist to blame China. I said, okay, fine. Maybe we don't agree on COVID, but we would agree that what's going on in the Xinjiang province and the slavery that's happening in China is bad, right? And they'll say, yeah. So cool, we agree. And by default, we agree that it's not racist to blame China. Finding common ground is instrumental to them questioning woke ideology on their campus. And the last thing, and I think this is obviously the most important thing, especially with our college kids, is grace. You can clap for grace. There's an age-old saying that if you're not a liberal in your 20s, you have no heart. And if you're not a conservative in your 30s, you have no brain. Okay. I thought that was more commonly known. That's okay. Now, I'm not saying we're going to entirely change the minds of our college kids, but if we can keep them from being radicalized through their college education, my guess is that they're going to come around to our side, probably when they start paying federal income tax. And because of that, we need to be able to extend grace, especially when our college kids are going through such crazy times. The parable of the prodigal son, I think, in the modern day is the parable of the prodigal college student. If we can manage the radicalization and hold it to a minimum by recognizing what wokeness is, which it is a strategy tool, I heard tool, strategy, all of it works, tool, strategy, asset, then we'll be able to manage how bad it gets on our college campuses. And one day, we'll be able to rejoice with a mind who wandered. I want to leave with this. We have a ton of different factions within the conservative movement. There's a lot of infighting going on, especially among the Republican Party and conservatives in general. That's all, I don't want to say that's okay, but it is what it is. But right now, if anything else, we need to band together to crush wokeism. And that starts by recognizing what it is. It is a strategy. And once we do that, I think that we can take back our schools. Do you agree? Yeah. I think we can take back our students. Do you agree? Yeah. I think we can take back our communities. Do you agree? Yeah. We can take back our state, and then we can take back our country. Yeah. Yes. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much. My name is Jobob. Seriously, God bless America.